Okay, welcome everyone to this webinar which is sponsored by IEEE Computational Intelligence Society and co-organized with IEEE CIS Kolkata. And this is a part of IEEE Day. So we have a chair which is welcome Professor Paramata Dutta as a chair to this session. And we have an announcement. I have an announcement for next webinar, which is in 12 November. If anyone interested, you can register for that also. So I'm give a stage to Professor Dutta now.
Thank you, Sansani. So it's a nice occasion. Am I audible to all? Possibly. So it's a nice occasion that we are going to participate for a very illuminating talk to be delivered by Professor Halgamuge, Professor Saman Halgamuge. Incidentally, today is IEEE Day also, so it's a part of celebration also. And it's a webinar which is jointly organized by, as has rightly been pointed out by Professor Sansani, that it is a joint venture, IEEE CIS webinar and IEEE CIS Kolkata chapter. So it's a nice occasion. Let me introduce, now it is the time that I introduce Professor Saman Halgamuge, our honorable speaker today. Professor Saman Halgamuge received the BSc Engineering degree in Electronics and Telecommunication from the University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka, and the DPling and PhD degrees in Data Engineering from the Technical University of Darmstadt, Germany. He is currently a professor of the Department of Mechanical Engineering of the School of Electrical, Mechanical and Infrastructure Engineering, the University of Melbourne, Australia. He is also an honorary professor of Australian National University. He is a fellow of IEEE, a distinguished lecturer of IEEE Computational Intelligence Society, and listed as a top 2% most cited researcher of AI and image processing in the Stanford database. His research interests are in AI, machine learning, including deep learning, optimization, big data analytics, and their applications in biomedicine and engineering. With this impressive biosketch, now it is time, and I invite Professor Saman Halgamuge to deliver his webinar talk. Professor Halgamuge, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Professor Sansani as well. I'm pleased to talk to you today at the IEEE seminar. And the topic is clearly of interest because we are all heading towards post-pandemic world, and there will be new challenges and opportunities. And I want to relate that fact to our research in AI and deep neural networks. So first, I want to show you my city and my university, and it's Melbourne in Australia. At the moment, we are in lockdown, but the good news is in about 2 or 3 weeks, we are supposed to come out of lockdown as the vaccination rates are going up. So that is a reality for many cities in the world. So now the good news is there will be a post-pandemic world that we are looking forward to. So this is my outline, and so I will talk about digital twinning in the context of the post-pandemic world, and then I will frame the work we have been doing in AI and deep learning, and I talk about how this is going to be relevant in the new normal that we are all going to experience soon, or we are already experiencing at the moment. Okay. So what to expect in a post-pandemic world? And definitely we all agree it is going to be a new normal, which is going to be different from the normal that we used to experience before the pandemic. And so there are a few features that we probably could agree on. So I'm not going to provide an analysis of what a post-pandemic world look like, but few points that are very relevant to our research, our work. So first point is we need to be a lot quicker in responding to health and environmental emergencies. That is for sure. So the vaccine developments took a lot longer than we would have liked. Similarly, and environmental emergencies, I take that as another very serious issue, and that we need to react to environmental emergencies pretty quickly, and we are also going to learn to live with it. And of course, the politicians are working on fixing some of the issues, but as scientists, we have to work on the scenarios that can come towards us in the post-pandemic world. So and in this context, and I think creating digital twins and strongly supported by AI will be crucial and more important and more have a more significant role in the new normal world than the world we are used to. Okay, so now what is digital twin computing? So this is another buzzword for some sort of activities that we have been doing all the time. So, and if you are in engineering and mechatronics engineering, you probably have heard of hardware in the loop. We always thought about we always did simulations, partly on the computer, partly on a real hardware. And so in a digital twin computing, what we are talking about is creating a very realistic model of something, whether it's a virus or whether it is some new material that we have developed, and it can be anything. So there are a few examples here, and autonomous driving that can be simulated entirely using grid computing and very sophisticated way supported by AI, robotics, medical treatment, and they all can be made to have a digital twin. So kind of avatar on your computer, and doesn't need to be entirely on computer. Part of that could be on real hardware. So at the moment, we are more concerned about creating digital twins of things. So electrical systems, for example, electrical grid of a certain state in Australia, they are interested in putting it into a digital twin. And and then we can also create digital twins of humans. So the interesting thing would be the diagram on the right, and where we have interactions between things and humans are also modeled using digital twin computing. So I believe that AI can play a really crucial role, but in building up these digital twins, more sophisticated ones, where we actually simulate the interaction between things and humans, and also making these digital twins dynamic. Dynamic means, and they are not static. We do not just create the model and leave it there. It's a model, it's a living model, and a model that actually keeps updating as we go, as it interacts more with the external world. All right, and so I go into, sorry, I jumped. Yeah, I go into the more familiar slide, the more familiar work for us in the AI area. So we are talking about learning. So we're talking about learning from the inspired by the brain. We're talking about deep learning systems, and so we know all these things. But the point I'm making here is rather a question: Are we best suited for creating the best deep learning models? What are our limitations as humans? How do we see beyond what we can see? And our inability to visualize, our biases, our prejudices, and how do we deal with that when we actually create new AI deep learning system, which I call 21st century AI, because deep learning is probably the most influencing part of AI in the 21st century so far. But this may change in future. But at the moment, this is what we have got. But I'm questioning our ability to create the best deep learning systems. Why am I questioning this? Now, I go back to the psychologist. I go back to the other areas of research that look at the brain, the intelligence, the learning. So you can see the most basic form. There are three types of intelligence that you can talk about. One is the analytical intelligence, which is probably more common to most of us listening or to the seminar. So we are good in academic pursuit, and that is more like an analytical intelligence. But you also look at musicians and artists, and they have what we call creative intelligence, imaginative and innovative problem-solving skills, and they entertain us, and they are very, very creative. And there is another type of intelligence, and this is actually a very basic description of intelligence. The other type of third type of intelligence is what we call street smartness. So it's practical intelligence. So you can't be a politician if you don't have that. Of course, you need to have all three. But practical intelligence is prominent in people who are dealing with public. And I would say even the teachers must have quite a lot of practical intelligence as well. So generally, all of us have all these three. But how do we relate that to neural networks we are working with and we are creating? So, but let us agree, and most neural networks and deep learning systems are not interpretable. So human interpretation is a key if you are going to create digital twins and with the help of neural networks, deep learning systems. And for me, I would say human interpretation of AI systems is a key. So interpretable AI is a very, very important task. And sometimes you would wonder whether we actually got it right when we talk about deep learning. So it is good to question, because when you look at the nature, so the two examples here, on the right hand side, and what they call tree cutter ants who cut the tree and take these trees to do some farming, and underground farming, they farm food for their children. Well, how sophisticated is that? And on the left hand side is a plant that you will probably see in many countries in Asia. And when you touch, it sleeps. And why does it sleep, right? And what sort of intelligence is that? Plants do not even have central nervous systems. So how does it learn to sleep and protect itself when there is a danger, suspicious danger? And there's an experiment done by Australian scientists, and where they demonstrate that you can actually teach the plant not to do that. If you can actually create the same movement, you touch the plant in the same manner for many days in regular intervals, then the plant learns, all right, this is not dangerous, let me not sleep, right? So there's so amazing things to look around. And when we talk about deep learning, and we are actually looking at tiny part of it. So this is my attempt to look at learning in a broader sense. And so I'm not planning to explain this, because this is, you can read this up in a new a paper that I'm going to put in archive. So what I'm trying to say here is the learning is very broader than what you think as unsupervised learning and supervised learning. And this top triangle is actually, from my perspective, the learning space. and it's only a fraction of it is explored so far. There are a lot more to be done in dealing with learning. Okay. So let me go to talk about tiny bit more about digital twin computing related to 21st century and AI. And so when I want to do, if I want to do digital twin computing, for example, I want to create a digital twin of current virus. Okay, so and that means I need to create a very realistic model of it. And not only that, I would like it to be dynamic. That means it learns the new variants as you go. So if the virus produces a new variant and my digital twin also produce that on computer, and I can even experiment with it to see what are the possible variants. And this is partially a reality when it comes to vaccines, and they predict what would be the normal flu virus will evolve next year, and that way they create the next version of the flu virus that you're going to get next year. So it's happening in a already in some ways, but I'm talking about a much more sophisticated digital twin that is supported by AI, and I would look at 21st century AI, and I can see there are few capabilities that we would like the 21st century AI to have in order to face the post-pandemic new normal. And the first one is to accommodate incremental or continuous learning. So the pandemic is the best example to explain this, because you get data every single day, and you hear about variant, you hear from another country, you hear about something strange happening in a different country, and so you hear about the interaction between virus and the society, and it differs from one place to another. And how could Denmark get it right somehow? And how could things go wrong in Israel a little bit? And so how do we model this? So this is information coming in every single day, every single hour. And how do we actually create a model that incrementally learn, and not that you have to completely train the model every time your data is changed. Instead, you have a steady model that gets fed this new data that you have, and then you incrementally learn. So incremental learning is, in my view, a key capability, and the 21st century AI should have. And the second one is the ability to generate AI automatically. So at the moment, and there are a good number of AI experts who have experience in creating AI models. But if you want to use AI broadly, in particular neural networks in broader sense, we need to have the capability for anyone on planet, any scientist on planet, any application engineer, software scientist on planet, to generate AI they want automatically. Okay, so that is a key feature we would like the 21st century AI to have. And the third one is a very important one, and that I already touched upon that, and it's the interpretation of deep neural networks, or interpretation of AI. And that is so much important, because otherwise we would know, if you have a black box neural network, we would not know how it works. So I come back to this in the next couple of slides. So the fourth capability, and is also an emerging one, and we need to have large amount of training data to create deep neural networks. And that may not be the case. Sometimes we have a small amount of data, very important, crucial data. That's all we got. So what are we going to do? Are we going to wait until we get quite a lot of data? So now, how do we actually work with the data we have? And this is somewhat connected to the incremental learning or continuous learning aspect as well. So, you know, when we're talking about dynamic digital twins, and I believe that we need to have all these 4 capabilities, and this is going to be so crucial in the new post-pandemic world. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about interpretability, and I will take examples and from real of my own research in few slides, in few minutes. So I put this as a y-axis, and I can call this the axis of interpretation. And this purple circle, purple dot, is the 0 point where your black box AI systems, the neural networks, the 100-layer neural networks that you create and that are not interpretable. Okay, so it's the conventional neural networks. And then I talk about going up. So in terms of interpretation, I go to the next slide to explain this a little bit more. So I call this low-level interpretation. So for example, your neural network can be interpreted as a mathematical equation, differential equation. And to some extent, it's possible, but not adequately. So, and this interpretation, I call it low level because it is only, it can only be interpreted by the scientists in this area. So it can be a mathematical model on microbial interaction. So, scientists working in microbiology could understand that. Or an example, Lotka-Volterra model, which we are trying to put into a neural network. Okay, so or some other kind of scientific model, a differential equation, even electrical circuit model, and can be put into a neural network. And that means once the neural network is trained, you can interpret neural network as one of these mathematical models, and I call it low-level interpretability, which is very, very important. But that may not be enough. And then I go to talk about high-level interpretation. And that is, for example, linguistic interpretation. Can I interpret my neural network using a set of rules? And a set of rules that lawyers would understand, okay? Because then they want to check whether my AI system is legally and ethically compliant. Because as you know, Europe has new set of rules for expert systems, AI systems. And so how do you check whether your black box is legal? So therefore, linguistic interpretation, partial semantic interpretation could be quite interesting to explore. And in between, we also have statistical interpretation that is also more like a low level, but not high level, but not entirely low level either. So, but okay, we can debate about it. But anyway, this is the axis of interpretation. So from low to high, and you can make your AI interpretable. And now I go to create an x-axis. All right, and an x-axis is about this approach of creating AI without having to do that manually. So again, my purple 0 here is a manual AI, manually created AI. So neural networks that we design using layer by layer, right? And these are manually created AI. So now I talk about this x-axis, and there's one very large community at the moment, and it's called neural architecture search. What they do there is to search for the best neural network architecture from quite a large number of possible neural network architectures. So they do not create it manually, but they actually get things like evolutionary algorithms, reinforcement learning, and to create AI. So NAS, or neural architecture search, is a sizable community now. So this is an example of automated generation of AI. So why is this so important? Because it increased the accessibility to AI, and in other words, democratization of AI. So more and more people could use AI if you gain this capability to generate AI automatically. In addition to NAS, there is another way of doing it, which I have been doing in my research. And this is discover AI by automatically generating from scratch. So the idea here is you first start with your default very small neural network or deep learning system, and then you grow it. You grow it as a part of the training. You create the structural growth, and you can prune as well. And there are people working on it. So you grow the neural network to become the deep learning system that suits your application, right? So this is also automated generation of AI. So, but you probably guess what am I going to do next, what my slide next look like. And this is combining these two directions. So, and they are orthogonal to each other, but there are lots of things we can do together as well. So you can generate AI automatically, that is my x-axis, and you can actually create AI that is interpretable, that is my y-axis. And I am placing my lab in this yellow space, and I call it fair AI, and because it is fair, accessible, interpretable, and reproducible AI. So that is why I call it fair AI. And you can see the top right hand corner, and you can see my PhD, and that was done a couple of decades ago, and in TU Darmstadt in Germany, and I completed in 1995. And that if you get hands on my PhD thesis, you will read some of these ideas there as well. But those days we couldn't implement some of these things, and in a grand way because of the nature of the computing. And but today we can actually do that. Okay, so now to give you some examples. So first of all, if you want to read some of these ideas, and this paper that I wrote and will be available in an archive in October 2021, and it will also go to IEEE Explore at some point when it gets published. So now I go back to talk about ideas from real research, but I must acknowledge many other people are working on it. But here I'm talking about some examples from my own research. So this is an old paper. So when you read the title, and you'll see that this is talking about neural network generation, automated generation, or aspect. But it also has an interpretation aspect in it, and it was a paper published in 1997. And so this is why I call it an old idea. So now, even though it's an old paper, and I'm actually reading my own papers to get these ideas implemented now with the ability to implement using the new GPU structures and so on. So the idea is actually to go back on our human capability to understand the concept of distance. So the concept of distance we understand in a natural way as Euclidean distance. And I would rather see it as our incapability, and because that makes sense to us, but it doesn't mean that it's always the correct way to use it. So if you look at this familiar equation on the left bottom corner, and this, if p equals 2, so this is roughly Euclidean distance, right? So between p's and p points and q points, right? If simple p equals 2, that is Euclidean distance. But what about how about p? You make p a variable that can be trained in your neural network. All right. If you do that, could the neural network itself or deep learning system itself would find the most appropriate distance measure automatically as a part of neural network training? So that was the idea proposed in this work, and P, and I call it a lambda in that paper. So if you look at that, and this is an old diagram, you can see that this is taken from my own paper. And so lambda equals to 2 is the familiar Euclidean space, and these are the two-dimensional trajectories of equidistance. So if lambda become bigger and bigger, and this ellipse become more like very square, And if lambda is less than 2, then it takes a different shape. Well, I mean, the interesting feature is here, the lambda or p, to make this a trainable parameter in the neural network. And I think it is much more sensible to look at an example. So this is again from the paper, and I took a benchmark to illustrate how this relaxation of the lambda, so the relaxation of our common sense idea of distance, could give you better results. So now, without going into details, let me say that every circle here or circular structure here on the leftmost figure is a single neuron. Okay, so this is a simple benchmark where there's two classes, and to separate, so class 1 is the left of the red, class 2 is the left of the red line, class 2 is right side of the red line. Okay, so you could see the neurons and the dotted neurons, the dotted circles are on the right hand side, and the solid neurons, solid circles are on the left hand side. So now this would be a very simple problem, except for the fact that there is a little island, this red island, inside the class 2 side, inside the right hand side, that we need to recognize as well. So the class 1 is everything left of the red line and this red box. Class 2 is the rest of the figure. So that is the task. So if, of course, we can solve it using Euclidean distance, and using Euclidean distance, and then it will fit in. And then if you make it d equals 3, right, and that means you're not considering Euclidean distance, and you can also solve this problem. But in this case, I use d equals 1, so p equals 1, so which is Manhattan distance or city block distance, and then you can solve this problem as well. Okay. Now, the interesting thing to compare would be the number of neurons used. So that means the size of the neural network, as well as the performance. So if you read the paper, you will see the performance is best on the third diagram, where I would tell the neural network that the neural network has the freedom to use whatever the distance measure it wants. That means I make lambda or p trainable, variable. It's not Euclidean. I don't fix it as Euclidean distance. On the leftmost figure, I fixed it as like Euclidean. In the middle figure, I fixed it as Manhattan. On the rightmost, I'll let it to choose as it fits the application. Now you can imagine that the best results in terms of performance, I got it when I did that. When I asked the neural network to figure out what the most appropriate distance measure is, and best results also in terms of the number of neurons used. That means the compactness of the neural network architecture, and it is the best in the third diagram. Okay, and more importantly, and this is neural architecture growth or the automated generation of neural networks, because I haven't decided how many neurons should be in the hidden layers. So this is a publication in 1997. So some of these concepts in supervised neural networks are not new. So, but it is worth looking at it. So this publication I was talking about is on supervised neural networks. But in the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about unsupervised learning. So that means that we don't have the labels. And so how do we do this neural architecture learning and interpretation at the same time? So this is an interesting work we have done in 2020, which I'm going to talk about. And this is the simple idea in unsupervised learning, and maybe I'll illustrate using this example. So this is a famous MINIS data set, and you take this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 digits. It's a supervised learning data set, but you can ignore the labels. That means you use it as unsupervised learning. And then what you do is you apply unsupervised learning neural network, and then you get this sort of a clustering result. So zeros lumped together, twos and threes and fours and ones, and they're somewhat separated. Okay, so this is using Euclidean distance, of course. So now the question here is, can unsupervised learning lead to discoveries that is beyond our capacity to comprehend a problem in the first instance? My answer is, my big answer is yes. Okay, here is a very nice example that I'm still proud of, and it was done some time ago and published in a journal called Bioinformatics. But I can explain this to you because it's a very, very illustrative example. So we were given a data set, and we were told that this data set is about 3 different types of cancers. Okay, type 1, type 2, and type 3. All right, so now it's a supervised learning data set because it has labels, right? Now we wanted to experiment with it, and we said, okay, we ignore the labeling done by the clinicians. So that means we are kind of searching for unknowns. So unknown unknowns means we do not know how many different types are there. We do not know who they are. Okay, it's complete unsupervised learning. When we created this, we used a method called growing self-organizing maps, which we created in 2000, and again, a publication in IEEE Transactions on Neural Networks. So then we got this surprising result. We didn't find 3 different classes, we found 4 instead, right? So you can see the blue means that it's lumped together, it's clustered together. Green means it's a bit far away, so green creates a natural border, so you can see the 4 different areas of the blue hexagons here. So, and we noticed that one area is very much like type 1, as clinicians said to us. Type 2 is also reasonably well picked up by our exploratory unsupervised learning, but where it went wrong was the type 3. Okay, so our unsupervised learning method says, and it interpret this this type 3 as 2 separate groups. So firstly we thought we got it wrong, and then we repeated, and then we found that, and then of course we talked to the biologist, our collaborators, and then they started researching on this. They did another literature review and actually found out that this type 3 is an emerging type 3, right? And even the biologists cannot agree whether it's type 3 or type 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, type 1 they agree, type 2 they agree, but the type 3 is not a homogeneous group. So we had a publication there. So we published and confirming or supporting the colleagues in biology and some clinicians who are questioning whether we could categorize this as a type 3, different type, or it's a collection of multiple types that we did not know at the time. Okay, so now this was done in 2004, and we were very careful to suggest that type 3 is not 2 groups, 2 new groups, and we said type 3 actually can be multiple groups. And based on the data and based on our capacity, we agree with those colleagues who are actually questioning this approach. So it's an interpretation and unsupervised learning way that we were able to make. So now this is the publication in 2020, and so we call it self-organizing nebulous growths, or SON. And here we came up with a combination of this unsupervised learning based generation of neural networks, combining that with the continuous learning ability. So the 3 or 4 capabilities out of the 4 capabilities I mentioned, 21st century AI should have. Now this is the 3rd one. And for the 4th one, to dealing with small amount of data, I'm not talking about it in this talk, but we are working on it. So the continuous learning, how do you do that? So here is an example, illustrative example. If you have data, you can use unsupervised learning to visualize. So if you look at the figure A, And what it does is visualization. And you can see there are 3 different groups, 3 different clusters. Okay, so what happens if you have new data? If you add new data, there are 2 major directions it can take. The easy one would be the new data, so belongs to the same 3 classes. This is, again, can be related to the pandemic. So the pandemic, let's say, have 3 key variants, and the new infections also belong to the 3 new variants we are aware of. Okay, so that is the B. Okay, but the bad news is C. What happens if there's a new variant developing, which is in red here in C? And that is what we call heterogeneous increments. That means data incrementation. That means data from today, the new data, do not belong to the existing 3 groups. It is a new variant, it's a new cluster, and we should be able to recognize the new data coming in as different from existing data, as well as we should be able to recognize if the new data is same as existing data. So that means an incremental learning system combined with unsupervised learning in this publication in IEEE Transactions on Neural Networks and Learning Systems. And what we are talking about is this both capabilities. Okay, so here we are, I'm referring to this concept of known knowns, known unknowns, and known unknown unknowns, even though I'm not planning to go in detail into it. So this is the publication, also available in archive, and you can download. And I think, just looking at the time, and I might go a little faster here, but I give you the idea briefly in 1 or 2 slides. And so there are a few methods that I can use to do the same, right? But not with fantastic results. So this is a TSNE, this is UMAP, 2 well-known methods I can use, not directly, but with some pain. So if you see this circle area, so this is homogeneous increment. So this is day 1, day 2, day 3, okay, or data gets incrementally added, and you can see this green area getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so you can recognize that, and using other areas as well, other methods as well. But we claim in this paper that Song does it much better, because it can work with both heterogeneous and homogeneous increments at the same time. So here is a much better example, I would say. So for the homogeneous increments, so this is Song. So this is how Song works. So you can see the clusters can be recognized. This is 20,000 data. So 30,000 is added to the second day. You can see the homogeneous increments are nicely recognized, and then another 50,000 added, and so on. And this red circle in this slide follows the homogeneous increments. That means, in the pandemic sense, it is the new infections that belong to the same variant, no new variant. Okay, so in the next slide, you can see in the same diagram, there's a new variant emerging. So that is the square here. It's hardly recognizable when we have 20,000 data, but when we have 50,000 more data, it's recognizable. And then when we have 100,000, it's more prominent. So you can keep tracking the new variant as well. So of course, when we published this paper and we finished the paper before the pandemic, so we didn't actually relate that to the pandemic, but it's very much useful if someone wants to apply to this epidemiological data related to pandemic. Okay, and in fact, as I understand, some of the people in Melbourne are doing it, but not us, using these sort of ideas. So again, to conclude my talk and just showing us a comparison. So this red line is the method we propose, very stable when the data get added. And these are the other methods like UMAP, the TSNE, and how they struggle to do the incremental learning. So the idea here is to create a model that can actually absorb data that was supplied incrementally. And so I'm getting towards my last slide, and I'm going to spend a minute on this to show that. So this research that I've been doing in probably over 3 decades about these aspects of interpretation of neural networks, as well as automated generation of neural networks, and many application projects are very well funded, and it's funded by Australian government, 20 or Australian Research Council grants, as well as 3 NHMRC. So NHMRC is our major funding body supporting research related to medicine and health. So also a few other foundations and mainly medical foundations, but also industry, including these companies, and some funded my AI research, some others funded very much applied oriented research. And in fact, one of these companies is founded by one graduate from my own group as well, so the UOG in Biosciences. So University of Melbourne, acknowledging a large number of PhD scholarship, and Australian National University as well, several internal grants and Data 61. And I also acknowledge my external collaborators and all over the world, in particular the research institutes and multiple universities in Europe and Asia, and so on. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Professor. Welcome. Professor Swansoni, now we can take the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Hakamuke. But okay, someone raised a hand. Hold on. If anybody has a question, you can type in the question box, and then I will read the question for you. Hold on. Okay, the question is, can the incremental learning be applied for industrial equipment predictive maintenance?
If I get the question right, can incremental learning be applied to industrial instrumentation maintenance, right?
Yes,
correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yes, industrial equipment maintenance requires you to keep tracking on how the instrumentation works. I can even give a quick example, and there was a project we have done here and with a company. It's called Smart Bolts. That means we have for example, a bridge has many hundreds of bolts installed in them, but some of these bolts are installed as sensors, and they provide us a continuous idea about the continuous health of the bridge structurally. Okay, so we can use that. This is continuous data, and then we can use this data to support the maintenance of the bridge. We know which parts of the bridge needs to be maintained much better than the rest of it. So yes, absolutely yes, and you can actually target your instrument maintenance and using incremental learning. So in other words, in context of the digital twin, you can create a digital twin of your instrument. Okay, and then you can keep a parallel of it, and then plan your maintenance according to that as well. Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, and next question is, how will the unsupervised learning behave with varying parameters, including earlier parameter used for the training?
Okay, how unsupervised? It's question is too general for me to give a precise answer. So, but I make a guess. So now, how does unsupervised learning deal with a situation where it is dynamically changing? Okay.
Yeah.
So now there are a lot to be done for that. And so my way of looking at it is this. So this is a dynamically changing parameters. If you look at the 20,000, unsupervised learning only find these green data points, and the blue data points are there, but they are too small to find. Okay. So when this is changing parameters, and when it changes and it gets picked up, and it's an interesting application we are doing currently, and we're about to publish that. It is about how the Alzheimer patients change over time. Of course, we use tissues, the stem cell tissues, to do that. And how does it change over time? And if you put medication, how does this tissue react to that? And very, very interesting trajectory. So it is in fact the incremental learning. Part of the incremental learning is to find out these changing parameters. And unsupervised learning give you the very, very good tool and to start doing that. It can't solve the problem, but it is probably one of the best directions of research we have to figure out what parameters are changing. Okay, what was different from yesterday? And if you compare yesterday and today, there is a difference. So then you can figure out where is this difference? And the next step is the interpretation of that difference. Okay, so it's quite a lot of work that is being done currently using unsupervised learning to pick up the changes in the parameters in a system. Yeah.
Okay. And next question is, what is the difference between transfer learning and incremental learning?
Okay, there is a connection. But transfer learning is, I would say, it is about learning from a system, and then you create a system, learning from set of data, and you use this transferred knowledge into apply to another set of data and then improve upon it. So that is transfer learning, the way I see it. So it's also a form of incremental learning, obviously, right? So from my perspective, it is a form of incremental learning. So, but incremental learning is more generic. So you can do incremental learning without necessarily calling it a transfer learning.
Yeah.
Right? You can do that too.
Okay, next question is continuous learning may also imply learning to forget. How may this be differentiated from acquiring new knowledge?
Yeah, continuous learning may also mean learning to forget. I fully agree. So now the learning to forget in itself, if we are the ones as humans who decide what to forget, and that is bias. Okay. So now learning to forget in the context of new data, in other way to describe that would be to give it a lower value, lower relevance. So that happens in fact, this diagram which you are looking at. So when you go from 20,000 to 50,000, and some of the parts of this data become less relevant. And and when we continue to learn, and you make certain parts less relevant, and that is actually kind of learning to forget. And it's more like in the context of new data, we tend to put less value on the previously learned parameters. It's not entirely forgetting, but for a moment, in the scale of things today, and they are less important for us. This is how I look at and forgetting in context of incremental learning.
Okay. I think this is the last question. The last question is supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Which one will be good for a new research scholar?
Okay, so that is a very generic and generous question, because it gives me to go back to this slide, and which I jumped a little bit. And so if you look at, I go to this slide, sorry. Yeah, okay. So now supervised learning is this dot on the top right hand corner, and unsupervised learning is the 0 point. Okay, so if you are a new researcher, and so I think you can start from either end, but you have to understand the big picture. Okay, we have tasks which are unsupervised learning, we have tasks which are supervised learning, but we have a lot in between, and this top square, as I call, and you can also have halfway supervised learning, which I call positive unlabeled learning. And so this is an existing technique. And but what happens here is, for example, and half of the labels are known, right? These are the real problems. So if you look at the real problems, and the real problems may not fit into entirely to a supervised learning. They may not fit into entirely unsupervised learning. So my suggestion is start from somewhere. So in my case, my PhD was around supervised learning. But after the PhD, I explored quite a lot of unsupervised learning. A lot of my grants are in near unsupervised learning and this area, because I found a lot of applications there. And one application is done here. And it's all over the place. Okay, so the problems you get to solve are all over the place. So my answer is start with something that you are most you feel passionate about. There are a lot of research to be done in entire triangle. We are not happy with what we got right now, and it can only improve. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay, I have one more question. We have one more question. Is there any method to moderate the distancing between the clustering formulation based on the dynamic data?
Okay, now I go back to this one. So this is a question that was asked by quite regularly by some of my colleagues that I work with. And so if you add dynamic data we use in the song, we use something based on self-organizing map. It's a far more dynamically changed version of SOM. It's not SOM anymore because it has properties of TSNE, UMAP, all this integrated in this method called song. And so now the interesting thing that happens is when you increase the number of data, you still fit that into this small square. Okay, so there is a compactness happening there, but this compactness is not the scaled simple compactness. This compactness that occur when you jump from one figure to another and make something, it has a message in it. Okay, so and that actually determines the distance between clusters in this algorithm. So now to answer back to your question, and I don't think there should be an ad hoc way that we attempt to keep the clusters far apart from each other using some artificial method that we think is useful. I think we should see the truth as it is. So that is what unsupervised learning does. And we let the system to determine the distance between clusters as appropriate and as needed. So that is my answer to that question. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have any question in the question box. So I think we should end the webinar right here. If anybody has a question, you can send an email to Professor Hakamuke later, right? And thank you very much, Professor Hakamuke, for giving us a nice talk. And thank you for Professor Dutta to be a chair for this session. And thank you everyone for listening. Yes?
Thank you, Sansani, and thank you, Professor Hakamuke. So sparing time from your busy schedule, but it was a very illuminating one, rich in content and so many directions. So thanks. Hopefully we shall be hearing from you in future also, with all cooperation that you extended.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Dutta. Thank you, Professor Sansani, and see you all in the new post-pandemic world.
Sure.
Sure.
We hope to meet in person. I mean, in post-pandemic
And
situation.
stay safe,
Very soon.
everyone.
Yes.
Thank you. So,
So yeah, okay.
okay.
So thank you very much, everyone, and I'm just gonna end the webinar right here. Okay. Goodbye.
Okay, thanks.
Good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.